Okay. Hello, everybody, and good evening. Thank you for joining us for this wonderful webinar today, one of the many in the Wildlife Chronicles series hosted by the Center for Wildlife Studies. My name is Dr. Bindu Raghavan. I am a veterinarian with a PhD in immunology and infectious diseases, and I work as principal scientist in the Wildlife Disease Program here at CWS. CWS is a 37-year-old nonprofit organization which is internationally recognized as a center of excellence in the arenas of wildlife research, in situ conservation, policy, and education. Until about 2020, we used to have host our Chronicles, Wildlife Chronicles series of talks in our office in Bangalore. But due to the pandemic, we have shifted to a webinar series, and we have had a host of interesting topics such as public health and zoonotic diseases, tigers, elephants, bioacoustics, and other interesting topics, including the one that you're attending today. So our webinars have so far been on a variety of topics, but I think today's topic will be of special interest to everybody considering the COVID pandemic. And you can visit our YouTube channel if you wish to view our other previous webinars. Today's webinar will also be recorded and available on YouTube. If you wish to support CWS initiatives and other similar outreach work that we do, you can use this QR code to donate. You can also visit our website, www.cwsindia.org, or contact us through email at outreach@cwsindia.org. All right. To begin with our webinar today. So, we're all aware that human impacts have led to changes in the natural areas and biodiversity. And we've also seen increase in or emergence of new and older zoonotic diseases with devastating impact on human and animal health. And how are our actions linked to not just human and animal health, but also to the health of our societies and our planet as a whole. And this is going to be the topic of our discussion today with Dr. Delia Grace and Dr. Serge Morand, our expert speakers for this discussion, who have thankfully decided to join us all the way from Ireland and from Thailand. So just to give a brief introduction of our speakers, Dr. Delia Grace is an epidemiologist and veterinarian with 20 years of experience in developing countries. She's a graduate of several leading universities, including the National University of Ireland, Edinburgh University, the Free University Berlin, and Cornell University. She's currently a professor of food safety systems at the NRI and scientist at the International Livestock Research Institute in Kenya and the CGIAR Research Program on Agriculture for Human Nutrition and Health, where she leads research on zoonosis and foodborne diseases. Her research program focuses on the design and promotion of risk-based approaches to food safety in livestock products in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. She is also a key player in ILRI's EcoHealth or One Health approach to the control of zoonotic emerging infectious diseases and agriculture-associated antimicrobial resistance. Her research interests include emerging diseases, participatory epidemiology, gender and animal welfare. Her career has spanned the private sector, field-level community development and aid management, as well as research. She has lived and worked in Asia, West and East Africa, and authored or co-authored more than 200 peer-reviewed publications, as well as written many training courses, briefs, films, articles, and blog posts. Our second speaker, Dr. Serge Morand, is the Director of Research at the National Center for Scientific Research at Montpellier University, France. He is also attached scientist at the CIRAD, which is the French Agricultural Research and Cooperation Organization, working for the sustainable development of tropical and Mediterranean regions, and is currently on secondment as adjunct professor, Faculty of Veterinary Technology, Kasetsart University, Bangkok, Thailand. Dr. Morand's research focuses on the links between biodiversity and health by investigating evolutionary ecology of host-parasite interactions and health ecology. His multidisciplinary work ranges from the genetic analysis of infectious agents and the resistance to antibiotics to the evolutionary ecology of reservoirs and vectors, and the modeling and geospatial analysis of disease transmission. That's like the whole gamut of One Health aspects. He is known for developing the field of health ecology by linking the environment, land use, and land cover changes, Biodiversity and the Evolutionary Ecology and Epidemiology of Zoonotic Diseases at the Frontiers of Human Health, Animal Health, and Conservation Biology in Southeast Asia. Dr. Morand is also interested in the ethics of individual and community engagement, excuse me, through consent, participatory approaches, etc., as well as health and environmental governance. Over the last 10 years, he has coordinated around 30 field studies in Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, the Philippines, and Vietnam, which have given rise to more than 200 publications and reference and outreach works. He has also recently been appointed as one of the 26 international experts on the high-level panel on One Health approach announced by the World Health Organization, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, the World Organization for Animal Health, and the United Nations Environment Programme. I welcome you both, Dr. Grace and Dr. Morand, to this session, and look forward to a very interesting discussion with both of you on this topic, which is the emergence of zoonotic diseases, the human modifications of our landscapes, and the emergence of zoonotic diseases. So, when we are talking about human modifications of landscapes, what exactly are we talking about here? What is it that we're doing to the environment that leads to the emergence of zoonotic diseases? I will ask Dr. Grace first, if you don't mind.
Yes, basically it's any change to the landscape, although some changes can be more problematic than others. One example is we're working on a project in an arid area of Kenya, where they have introduced an irrigation scheme to grow plantation crops. And this brings water to a place which was always dry. And with water, it brings vectors, it brings mosquitoes, and the mosquitoes bring diseases, and the animals and people have not been exposed to these vectors or diseases before. So that's one concrete example of how changing in a landscape can change the diseases which are present. I'm sure Serge will have a lot of other suggestions from his work.
No, it's really like this. Is quite everything that changes so fastly, mostly because of the international demand, for example, for new crops and new agriculture or farming, and these are affecting a lot on the transformation of land. And the second one is also this infrastructure, road and dam, especially, for example, that can be due for the electricity, but also for the irrigation. This is one. On the mining, which is the really important. All of these has finally affect not only what we can say the natural land, if they exist, or the primary forest, but really the livelihood of people, mostly this habitat that has used to be managed locally with a multifunctional usages, which are completely homogenized and that are really prone for emerging or for spreading of several kinds of infectious and zoonotic or vector-borne disease.
Yes, and I was just thinking about what Dr. Grace and what you just said about, our human demand for food, both for us and for our livestock, pushing this change in land use and landscape level changes that we are seeing, cutting down of more natural areas to give way to agriculture and human habitations. But I mean, how exactly does that, for example, what Dr. Grace said, where you had areas that were previously dry now having a higher level of moisture, which then allowed new parasites to come in. I guess it's the other way around when it comes to cutting down of forests, right? I mean, what do you think is? I mean, maybe you could tell our audience about what happens there, the kind of drivers that, what the kind of processes that lead to zoonotic disease emergence in those kind of landscapes.
Yes, Bindu, I think you've really, put your finger on the driver of drivers, which is people and demographic change. When I first started to work in Africa, the population was around sub-Saharan Africa, the population was around 600 million. Now it's over 1 billion. And by 2100, which some of the younger people here will live to see, the population will be 4 billion. So that's, and back in the 1800s, it was around 200 million. So in 2 centuries to go from 200 million to 4 billion, you can imagine the pressure that puts on natural ecosystems. I mean, people need and deserve to be fed, to have a good life, to have the opportunity of which you know, sometimes in rich countries we take for granted. So it's a huge challenge as to how we can accommodate those two conflicting goals, enough for everyone, and yet to preserve the natural resources which we all depend upon. And as we saw with COVID, if we don't safeguard, it will be the worse for humanity. That was a little bit of a digression, but I think it's very important, you know, the driver of drivers. Sometimes we focus too much on the surface and not enough on the depth. Deforestation, though, I mean, it's hard to say which drivers are most important. As Serge mentioned, they're all important, but deforestation is considered to be particularly worrisome. And one of the reasons is that a lot of deforestation occurs in tropical areas, which are surprisingly fragile. A tropical jungle can look incredibly, you know, as if it's been there forever. But once you start cutting the trees, it doesn't take long to get a rapid degradation of that environment. And because they are so rich in species, in vectors, in animals, there are also a lot of pathogens in these systems, which when they're disturbed and when new people and animals come in, can then jump from their hosts where they had co-evolved with and were often not causing much harm at all, into new hosts where they can cause a lot of harm.
Absolutely. I think Dr. Morand has specifically done some work on deforestation, I think for palm oil.
Yeah, but before I want to really agree with what's said to Delia, to what's going on very in terms of it's increasing of population, but sometimes it's a pure increase of population. But in some other place, maybe even if it's not so pure increase of population, is the increase of the urban populations. And when we look at the projection globally, we see that the increase of the urban population, the big city, will be in the tropical areas all over the world, which means that there will be a big, important challenge, because increasing the number of people in the city means first that the city will expand at the vicinity. So you have a lot of interaction with agricultural land or whatever around. And we see in some environments, sometimes is also a fragile environment, especially the Delta or elsewhere. And the second thing, it's also the demand of to feed these people, which are really completely on. Sometimes they change also their feeding habit, their diet, more westernized, more processed food, more rich in meat, and this may affect a lot also considerably the impact on the countries and sometimes everywhere. And we have to imagine that, just to reinforce this, that all of these big cities, this big urbanization within the tropical areas is also the place with a rich biodiversity, but also a place with somehow, when we look also at the map of the FAO, and it's, Delia would know that also, it's also rich in terms of livestock and poultry. So we are really in the good way to with this still increase of urbanization, to make the link between the bad links, I would say, between all of this.
Yes, and then you have this, you know, as if things were not complicated enough, you also have climate change, which also we are driving through our own actions, but which is considered to be another driver apart from all of the other actions that we're doing. And that, how does that impact emergence of zoonotic diseases?
Yes, that's an area which is under quite a lot of research. And I must say that there is still evidence is still emerging, but it can affect zoonosis in several ways. mainly by changing the environment suitable for vectors and pathogens. Generally speaking, vectors like mosquitoes or midges, they prefer warmer, wetter weather, which is a trend under climate change. There's a disease called blue tongue, which is a viral disease of cattle, and it's spread into the UK, into England, where it has caused enormous damage. It's spread from warmer climes, is directly influenced by climate change. There's quite a lot of work on modeling, which looks at the different parameters which will change disease distribution. It's not just vectors. Basically, any pathogen which has an environmental stage, which can survive in the soil or the water, is quite susceptible to climate change. Pathogens which live only in animals, such as brucellosis, are not so susceptible to climate change. But say pig tapeworm, cysticercosis, that survives in the soil, so it's susceptible to climate change. Cholera bacteria lives in the water, it's susceptible. Leptospirosis, also water associated. Then some diseases are flood associated, and we know that extreme events are more likely under climate change. So flood associated diseases, again, leptospirosis, are likewise quite climate sensitive, is a word we often use for diseases which are influenced by climate, and quite a lot of zoonoses are climate sensitive, but not all. Maybe Serge will add.
I have to reopen my microphone. Yes, completely agree. So we have all this kind of modeling. We have some empirical data that show really for the long term, and is very, very true. I would say, for example, even in this tropical region, all the tick-borne disease, which could be also by mite, like the scrub typhus, everything that is really related. And we have some data in Thailand that we show this, and it was also found in China that increased during the 15 years, so 20 years of data. We have an increase in some place of 0.5 of the degree, which is quite important. And this was completely associated, controlling with many factors, land use change, everything, and people on also the way that the surveillance system that is really related with part of the increase is really related to climate change, like they found also in China. With our colleague in Liverpool, we did a meta-analysis several years ago, and it was Mary McIntyre that did this. What she collected a lot of information on the data, on data web and all production, and they investigated around 500 pathogens, and that are really from human and domestic animals, only in Europe. And they found that 63%, so two-thirds of these pathogens are climate sensitive. Only the rainfall and temperature, but it also can be something related to the climate change, like the wind, for example, that are also changing with the climate change. So this is one thing. So we have really evidence based on data produced by many scientists over the world. And the second thing that we have we know already that is the climate variability, especially in India or Southeast Asia, but also in Africa, the ENSO and the El Niño, La Niño event, which are really, there are many diseases, many outbreaks, and that are linked with the rise of the El Niño or rise of the La Niña. And this is also really affected by the climate change. So we know that there is now at the moment, so maybe not in the future, but at the moment, there are more events of El Niño, La Niña. More difficult to predict these events, and with a higher also intensity, which means that is also is not good, because this event is a systematic event. When you have El Niño, La Niña, it will affect the agriculture, it will affect also the people, it will affect the livestock. So meaning everybody is in stress, and everybody is also favored either the pathogen directly or either the vectors. So this is a big issue, and for the modeling, it's very difficult to modelize and to predict at midterm and not long term, but to predict the ENSO variability.
Yes, I absolutely agree. In fact, Dr. Grace mentioned about blue tongue. It's very interesting that I was working on bighorn sheep for my PhD in the US, and I was working in Washington State, and we did not ever see blue tongue in bighorn sheep there because of the kind of altitudes they live in. But during my PhD, towards the end of my PhD, this was around 2015, we suddenly heard of blue tongue infestation in the deer and in bighorn sheep, and it was like completely new. And then it was also associated with the warming of the climates there. And so, yes, there is a change in and shift in the way where pathogens are being distributed or being found now to newer latitudes and altitudes. And similarly with what Dr. Morand said about the rains and El Nino patterns, we are seeing unusual rains in southern India right now with flash floods and all kinds of problems because of the rains. And I wonder how that has impacted, vectors, especially of zoonotic diseases, including mosquitoes. And we also have seen in the past few years, I've been following reports of scrub typhus, especially because I was very interested in tick-borne zoonotic diseases. And I have noticed really sudden increase in the incidences that are being reported of scrub typhus, not just from the parts of India that were typically known to have that, but from new areas like the foothills of the Himalayas. And it was unheard of in those regions. And so now you're seeing more of these cases. And people are like, public health specialists are have no clue where these cases are coming from. But those of us who do work at the interface of livestock and humans and wildlife, we know what's happening there. So it's very interesting.
No. Yeah, completely agree. I have some friends are working in India, working on the scrub typhus. So it's really increasing a lot, and it was not very on the radar of the public health. And it's starting to be more complex because now we recognize that a lot of animals can be the good host for the mite and for the chigger mites, including the poultry, so including the potentially the dogs, of course the wild bird. So it's starting to be a little complicated to understand this, and it's starting to be an issue. We know that in PubMed, now I see that more and more report of scrub typhus outbreaks in India. So yeah, true.
Yeah,
and I think this, but I think this also underlines the need of the One Health approach, because doctors, as Serge said, human doctors aren't always aware of zoonosis. They tend to be neglected, and they're not always aware of changes in disease dynamics. So we did one study in a hospital in northern Kenya, where there was a lot of fever, a lot of patients were coming in with fever, and they just assumed that it was malaria and treated them with malaria. And when we actually looked at their blood, we found that there was actually quite a lot of Q fever in the people, and Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever, which again has shown up in India. And the doctors they didn't look for it, and they didn't know it existed. And so they were giving treatments which were, completely ineffective.
The exact same thing happened in India too. There were cases of Q fever which were being misdiagnosed as malaria and being treated as such, and same with CCHF, as you have just told us. Exactly. And I think the importance of One Health again. Especially in India, I'm not sure about how it works in other areas currently, other tropical areas. But in India, I have seen One Health is still very much the domain of the medical people. I mean, they think One Health is medical people going out and doing studies in wildlife and looking at that. But I think what is missing here is the role of course, the biologist, the wildlife biologist, who has a better understanding of the ecology of wildlife and vectors, wildlife vectors especially, and the veterinarians who by our training are I think, trained to look at a herd level of disease rather than an individualistic approach. So we are, in that sense, trained to look at the larger picture rather than the individual picture. And so when we see an animal that has a fever, it's not like, oh, I have to treat the fever for this animal. It's like, how many other animals have fever, and what kind of fever are they, showing, and where is it all clustered and stuff like that. So I think One Health necessarily needs to involve all three sectors, including veterinarians and wildlife biologists and ecologists, and medical doctors, to be able to be practical on ground. And this is something I will come to towards the end of our discussion. But what I wanted to ask was that, so we're talking about all of these, diseases and these pathogens that are out there in the environment, and there's, landscape changes happening, there's climate change happening, and suddenly you have disease coming up. So were all of these pathogens always there in the environment, and now, suddenly they're coming out because we've removed forests? Or are they, of course, some of them are emerging, some of the pathogens are emerging, but like, where have all these vectors, where have all these pathogens been all this time?
Well, they have been with us for a very long time. I did my PhD actually on trypanosomosis, which is a zoonosis spread by tsetse fly in Africa. And there were tsetse flies 65 million years ago in Africa, when they were there when the dinosaurs were still there. So, I mean, lots of these vectors, bacteria, they can be traced back using phylogenetics a long, long way in history. Some of the diseases we acquired even as primates. So diseases like yaws, it appears that we have had all the way through human evolution. Others have jumped species from animals, and they've been in animals for a long time. There was a big jump around the Neolithic when farming first started. That's when people started to come into very close contact with livestock, when they started farming around 8,000 and domesticating animals around 8,000 to 10,000 BC. Those are diseases when, for example, rinderpest is believed to have turned into measles, the common childhood disease of measles. And now we are probably entering a new era of jumping species, another Neolithic type revolution, as we put unprecedented pressure on natural environments and expose ourselves to natural environments. And all those bacteria and vectors, which had been, as I said, been there probably from time immemorial, they speciate, are now finding their way to us and to our livestock.
Yes, Dr. Morand, would you like to?
Yes. Just to complete, because everything has been said. So yes, we have a free. We have I think the first, it was in Africa, because we are a species that are coming from Africa. Actually, we are a complex species, because we are an hybrid on the hybridization with several species still. And so we are a very young species, but this in a way that we interbreed with some of pre-human species. And so we have this origin of these a lot of for example, herpes virus that are coming from evolution, or for example of some of fleas, or some other parasite or intestinal parasite, or the microbiota. So we have something that is really originated for evolution, and that explains also that the proximity to non-human primate may explain also this jump. We have so to be more recent, yellow fever, but after dengue, it's not so long. Zika, chikungunya, it's middle of the last century. Plasmodium knowlesi, it's still coming now in Southeast Asia. So all of this link with the non-human primates. And yes, the livestock, so the out of Africa, of course, because it was also a way to explore new environment and to acquire the local pathogen for this new environment. We have to remember also that we have a lot of pathogens that are coming from the soil also, not only from the animals, but from the soil. For example, the several mycobacterium And the Neolithic revolution and with the domestication of animals, which is very clear. And what is important that I gather all the data concerning all the disease, all the pathogens, and for all the domestic and the commensal on the animals. And what we found is a clear relationship between the time since domestication and the number of sharing disease between each of animal and us. Of course, the dog is the animal that are more linked with us a long time and share a lot of disease. And lastly, the rabbit that they are not, we are because it's only 2,000 years ago unless that the rabbit was domesticated and not completely fully domesticated. But what does it mean also that these animals, if we think that the humans, we share pathogen with the non-human primates, it means that all of these livestock, poultry, or the rodents that are commensal, they can share also the disease with their related one, which means that we create, they are bridges, and they are very important. They put bridge between the non-domesticated, the non-pet animal, the non-commensal animals, to these animals and after to these humans. The very, very simple way is all the flu, the avian flu viruses that are circulating. Of course, yes, it's the wildlife that are the primary reservoir, but after is a circulation between the domestic birds, the poultry, and after with also the swines for some case, and after with this is the process. And the domestic, if it's enter into the domestic animals, it's a community with humans. It's help for this pathogen after to enter to be adaptive to humans. That's why when we look at all the emergence, most of the time we have a good link with the domestic on the livestock, including the pest. And I would say the dog are one of the most important, like for trypanosoma also.
Okay, my apologies. My computer suddenly died on me, so I got locked out a little bit. But yes, so I did want to catch up on something that you had mentioned about how all of these pathogens have evolved with us over the years and over millennia, in fact, and have been around in animals or humans or in the environment. So what I wanted to highlight was that our persecution, or rather the human persecution of bats, is without any reason, because they are actually doing us a service by hosting all of these pathogens within them and keeping them away from us. But we insist on going closer to them, isn't it?
Yes, and of course bats are also pollinators and they eat insects, which is, so they provide what we call ecosystem services. These are things which the elements of an ecosystem, be they animal or plant, do for us to improve our lives and our environment, and which no one pays them for. And the economists say that things which are not paid for are often undervalued and not taken seriously. So and especially bats are a particularly high risk species. I mean, there have been various studies done which have looked at the number of diseases which have jumped from animals to people. 75% of them come from wild animals, although some of the most serious, such as the bird flu, had a animal livestock link. And some of the most risky species are bats, non-human primates, and rodents. So stop eating bats, everyone.
Yeah, I agree, because I work with rodents, but for a long time the rodents, yes, are the best, because the best player. So, but they are very cute. I really like rats, the other rodents, but for sure they have the impact of rodents on humanity was quite important concerning plague, but also look at the Lassa. At the moment, at the Lassa fever in Africa, the impact is much more important than Ebola in terms of the number of people each year that die from this. And there are sometimes these rodents are also very commensal rodents like. For the bats, it's quite surprising because in terms of history, they did not. Long-term history, yes, they contribute. For example, we see some link, for example, the trypanosoma that are linked, but we have to go million of years before, so really before the human to arrive. On the bat, they don't really contribute. What we did for 1,500 500 viruses from RNA or DNA viruses. So from all the mammals, including humans, and we try to find the sharing of these viruses according to the group. So what we found that, of course, primate is at the top of sharing of disease in combination with the humans. And after we have all the group related to livestock or to the pets, like the carnivores. So all of these are very high. And the rodents are very high. And curiously, what I say, the bats are not very contributing for all or in terms of all the pathogens we know, on all the viruses, except the RNA viruses. And these are quite recent. But when we see, for example, there is one, rabies, the rabies virus, the real reservoir is the bat. But how many people died because of a bat compared to the dogs? Yeah, or to the cats, even to the cats. So this is a way also that we have to think. When we look, because I did also for myself, when we look at the people that work on bats, or like me, I work on rodents. I work on rodents and manipulate when I was starting before without glove, nothing. I did not know. And I was a place where I was never, and I can say that I touched thousands of rodents. I was never infected by a hunter or I'm completely clean serologically. I mean, maybe some of them not clean. But there are also a lot to test people that work on bats. So not so much. So it means that the events are sometimes very rare. But sometimes in some places, maybe not. For example, we may suspect that the coronaviruses that had emerged, they are really related. So they are special group. Sometimes they live in caves, and possibly they are very small. So I can assume this mode for the coronaviruses, nobody eat these bats. They are too small. They are nothing to eat. But they live in cave with some other bats that you can sometimes eat, or you can use the guano. And there is a lot of things that we're starting the project like this to better understand. The people in Thailand is finished. They don't eat. They say my grandparents eat bats. Nobody eats bats. It's finished. Even the wildlife is really decreasing at very fast rate. But they still have some activities in caves. And this is potentially how we manage the guano, how we manage all of these, all the other animals, including dogs. We know that, for example, there are two coronaviruses that emerged in Malaysia in June, new coronaviruses. So at the spread of the coronaviruses, and this one is new coronavirus from what? From dog. So, and it was mistaken with the SARS-CoV-2, but it's a new one. So it means that there's a lot of interaction of these. These events are rare. What we have to understand, why these rare events sometimes starting to spread on success, which is very difficult after to better manage. After we know that in India, on Pakistan, for example, the Nipah virus is really human behavior. It's really because the people are too close in terms, especially for the palm sap, for the sap, which is really the problem. So this is a human behavior typically. And this
I think that's true for all the zoonotic diseases, isn't it? It's all human behavior, actually, as Dr. Grace had said. We are the root of all root causes for zoonotic disease emergence, because these diseases were happily living in the animals, and the animals were happily living with these diseases until we went in changed everything around and
Yeah.
muddied the waters.
Yes, but sometimes, for example, scrap typhus, yes, the behaviors are, okay, you have to put boots, you have to put a big socks, you have to take shower, you have to be careful, or even you go to the ticks. Yes, there is some part of the disease, but sometimes you can really, that's why the public health information is very important. So it's mostly by understanding the transmission, and by working with the public health, the livestock, and how to better understand the transmission. So what are the different causes of the transmission, and better work on the prevention. Yeah. So how we have to work, because all the risk is like this. We have danger. Okay, we know that bats they have danger inside. After you have exposure, so the contact with the bat on the way, and after you have really the problem of the public health, so the resilience of the system, the fragility of the system. So if the system is not very fragile, after there is really a big problem in terms of outbreaks, or the problem of concerning people. So we have to know how to work in this three compartment to avoid the big crisis.
I think the most important is we have to listen to our scientists, because today I came across, just by chance, an article, a research paper that was written in 2017 about how RNA viruses will cause the new global pandemic in the future. And I was like, oh my God, in 2017, some great scientist had predicted this and nobody took note of it. And Dr. Morand and Dr. Grace, you guys have been predicting things like this through your research publications and your research for ages. And people, and by people, I mean policymakers and people in government, people in public health departments, refuse to take notice of this. So this is one of the, I think, major challenges I have seen, is how does one operationalize One Health on the field? How do we, I mean, it's great to say we have to look at it from a One Health approach, we have to do a One Health study, we have to use a One Health strategy. What exactly is, I mean, how do you operationalize it on the ground? How do you get all these people to sit together and come up with a strategy where everybody agrees that you do this part? What are the challenges you faced?
I think, first of all, you have to get it on the top before you get it on the ground. So it's like any business, or once the leader, once the CEO buys into something and wants it, then that's essential for getting the frontline workers to buy in and wanting it. And here the news is quite good, because ever since avian influenza, there has been increasing liaison between the Food and Agriculture Organization, the World Health Organization, and the World Animal Health Organization, or OIE. And that's something which they set up during bird flu days, called the tripartite, which means the top international governmental organizations, IGOs, are completely bought into One Health. And just this year, UNEP has joined them, the United Nations Environment Programme, which is very good, because environment has always been, I would say, the neglected partner in One Health. So bringing in environment is very important. So the top level is quite good now. The World Bank just recently brought in its guidelines for the operationalization of One Health. I was actually an external reviewer for that, so it's into the World Bank now. What we still have a challenge is getting it all the way down to the frontline workers. So still we find that once you're talking like a district officer level, practicing veterinarians, practicing clinicians, wildlife officers, they often don't work together very well. But I think now that everybody has been alerted by COVID, and there's widespread consensus that One Health is what is needed. I hear that from everyone, from governments, from donors to IGOs. So there's widespread consensus that One Health is needed. There's a sense of urgency. The World Bank, you were talking about predicting. The World Bank several years back predicted that if there was a really bad pandemic, it could cost $1 trillion. Now we reckon COVID has cost $6 or $7 trillion, maybe more. So that is a lot of money to lose. So I'm quite hopeful that we're going to see more of One Health, and that it will get further than it has before. Maybe Serge has different thoughts from
No,
Thailand.
yeah, completely agree, because I have the chance to have joined these the OLEP and this committee between the tripartite plus UNEP, and I can say that yes, it's true that something is going on. So more involvement in the environment. Actually, it's working nicely, but there's still some difficulties even at this organization. Just to tell you, the tripartite is working on the global action plan for One Health. And finally, the UNEP, not with UNEP, the UNEP are doing is global plan action for environmental health. So it's not still on. It will take a little time, even if we have maybe not so much time. No, the difficulty, I agree. So I agree with this. The problem is also finally we have two problems in operationalizing the One Health. First, with the administration, and which is normal, they are really in silo, and it's really difficult, and they have not so much time to see. For example, working now we have a big project launched by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of France for the One Health in Southeast Asia, because France has putting has to be partner of development of the ASEAN, and it was granted last year. So we decided to, the French government decided to launch this. So working a lot on discovering that quite very interesting stuff. So for example, in Thailand, the head of the disease control department in the Ministry of Public Health is a vet. She's a vet. Which is very rare. My colleague that is working at the French embassy, which is the regional counselor for public health, he said that this would never happen in France. It will be a physician. And it's true. So they are working there, and they are doing this, what we name, the Mekong Basin Disease Surveillance. So they, after the avian flu, actually, it was related what say before Delia, it was with this, is they organize themselves, but is in a ASEAN way, so meaning that it's not like the European Commission. It's more flexible, it's more by consensus, by someone taking the lead for this and showing, so experience sharing, evaluating each other, auto-evaluation, and they organize this Mekong Basin Disease Surveillance. So the four four Indo-Burma countries, or what I say in France, the Indo-Chinese, the Indo-China countries, and plus China, which is important in this way, and to have China involved. And but they recognize at this time, because when we said to implement that, and I see that on the field, okay, to discuss with the livestock department, so the animal health, to discuss with the public health, the One Health, they know quite a lot, because they're thinking that they have to do this. But when we discuss with agriculture, with the forest protection or the fisheries, One Health, they don't know why they are. It should affect their department, and this is so they recognize. So we need to have a more less silo, more communication between the department. This is one thing. And of course, using the real governance at the local and national level. And the other thing, which is also still difficult for scientists, is working also in terms of interdisciplinarity. So we have not the same question, not the same values in research also, and not the same timing. Working the social scientists, they have their time, they have their way, the importance of the qualitative data. The ecologists are more interested by the quantitative data. So we have to see how we can work. We have some knowledge, and I would say that we have to share the knowledge. And I'm happy because Delia speak about also the participatory epidemiology or the traditional epidemiology. For example, I was very interested in Leptospira at the very beginning to understand. And I asked questions about the local people. They know perfectly the Leptospira. Rodents, what they have to do to put boots, everything. And they follow this. And I ask them, do you think that it is the rodent the problem? And they say, of course not, this is not the rodent. This is not the rodent. We have to have a flooded, we have to have the runaway of water. I say, okay, interesting. And I go back to the hospital and discuss only, not ask about the rodent, where are they? And there it's interesting because all the cases are situated in the place when there is some slope on. I say, okay, can we share the data all together? I've done the rodents, you have done the humans. So we did that on 200 villages. And they were right. The rodents were not infected at the same place as the humans. It's not the rodents. But for this, I have to be published, this paper, I have, because they are mostly medical doctors to be reviewer, I have to do some workshop at the Leptospira conference group to show this before, to be sure that this can be accepted. And because it was the role, it was the role also the environmental, because it's an environmental disease also. And it was also the role of the livestock, of the dogs, that can be also important, and not only the rodents. So that's why we need also the knowledge of everybody. So scientists have knowledge, conservationists and NGOs have knowledge, administration have knowledge, local people and on this they have knowledge. We don't have the same values, we do not have the same vision. We should find the way not to have the same one, it's impossible, but to share knowledge, share values. And with this, we can really, although it takes time, but we can really implement a better One Health approach for a better management of territories, local territories.
Absolutely, Dr. Morand. I really agree with you. And I'm particularly struck by something you just said, although we are completely out of time and we need to go to Q&A, but I would like to remind all our audience that we talked about One Health, and you'll typically see this Venn diagram of environment, animal, and people. And people typically is supposed to be public health. But as Dr. Morand pointed out, there's a sociologist. We have to also include anthropologists and sociologists, because health behaviors and changes in our behavior is so much to do with our culture, our society. So if we don't include anthropologists, we are failing at that very level, because we don't know how to bring about that change in people that we want to see. So I think that's very important. That's one part that most people miss out on.
And I think Delia has done a lot of work on study like this in several places.
Yes. So with that, I thank you very much for this really interesting discussion. And I would like to now go on to the question answers. We have some very interesting question answers from the audience. And I would like each of you to take turns to answer them. So the first question is, thank you for the wonderful discussion. Would love to hear your thoughts on how One Health approaches, I'm guessing, prioritizing diseases in a changing landscape that is vulnerable to multiple zoonoses. Especially when there is no availability of baseline prevalence data and in a resource crunch setting like Africa and South Asia. So basically, how do we prioritize disease approaches to disease management when we are talking about multiple zoonoses and they keep emerging and re-emerging?
Yes, I think it's very important actually to take the multiple disease, to take the multiple pathogen approach, because historically a lot of research was only, someone would research leptospirosis or cysticercosis, but they often didn't look for other diseases. And classically, they did not look for in animals and people and wildlife at the same time. Someone would do a study on wildlife, somebody else would do a study on livestock. So doing all kind of species at the same time and as many pathogens as possible is essential. You need some data. You can do a certain amount of work with what we call the participatory epidemiology, so you can get quite rich information on syndromes. People are quite good at describing their symptoms. Sometimes they are what we call pathognomonic. For example, if there's a condition called carpal hygroma in cattle, which is basically water on the knee, and if cattle have got water on the knee, it's likely to be brucellosis is in the herd. But syndromic information is very cheap. Talking to local people, it can give you a rough prioritization, but in order to have a proper scientific evidence-based prioritization, we need to do those surveys on multiple pathogens and multiple species.
And the problem is quite costly.
I will be brief with the questions as we are short of time.
Yeah, but I agree. But the problem is it's quite costly. So how we can support really the public health and the animal health sectors that can be really that can do a good job, and with the money to be this, and it's really a problem. Yeah, in many places. Yeah.
Yes, I can testify to that. So second question, have you found there is a particular concern amongst the public, particularly in rural areas, in relation to the potential for domestic dogs to carry COVID-19? That's very specific.
Yes, I agree. They were, because we have a small project on dogs, not only for rabies, but we put collars on dogs, and we look at the because the dogs are very important in terms of not for many diseases, or like rickettsiosis, also many stuff. And here we have these community dogs, and sometimes really owner dogs, and so try to understand better. And yes, we have quite a lot of questions of the people working that if the dogs are for the COVID, especially that they learn in the radio that there was some cases of dogs in Myanmar, not far. So this raised more questions to us about what could be the role of dogs. Yeah.
Dr. Grace, did you have a similar kind of experience in Africa?
No, I would say not so much. People are for one thing, COVID has not been so severe in Africa. We have been lucky, perhaps because of our young population, or people spend so much time outside. People are more concerned actually about the effects of COVID management, which have probably been much more costly to Africa than the COVID disease itself. And that brings us, and in fact, after the first wave, when we tried to lock down, now most countries have just opened up because they feel that the livelihood damage was just getting too extreme. And that's another important point, that it's not just about the diagnosis or the assessment, which we're quite good at and getting better, but the management and understanding the appropriate management, especially in resource-poor contexts, is still a big challenge, and much more research is needed.
Yes, absolutely. And I can also testify to the fact that people were paranoid. Even in India, there were lots of people who actually let out their own pet dogs because they were worried that they would get COVID-19 from them. So we did encounter a lot of that too. The next question is, you have mentioned One Health as an approach, but what exactly does it mean? I think this has been answered to some extent by both of you, but if you could address it more specifically, what exactly does One Health mean as an approach?
Yes, I mean, there are lots of definitions for One Health, but they all have some kind of essential components. I would say, the first is the three healths, that you have to think of ecosystem health, animal health, and human health together if you want to solve problems that occur at the interface of these three healths. So One Health, obviously, you might not use it for diabetes management, but an issue which falls at the heart of the three healths needs a One Health approach. The second is transdisciplinarity. So that is working hand in hand across those three healths, but also with the areas around socioeconomics. We talked about anthropology, economists, behavioral economists, gender specialists, all need to be involved. Yes, I think and then the third element, which is actually taken from EcoHealth, which is a closely aligned, the three sisters of health, if you like, of health at the interface are One Health, EcoHealth, and planetary health, which have many elements in common. So the third element is bringing together communities, scientists, and policymakers or decision makers. So I would see those as the three elements of a One Health approach. Maybe Serge has something else to add?
Just to add that the was really there still the 1968 by the UNESCO conference in Paris that was on human ecology, but also on the really starting of the ecosystem approach. So on this at this time already, by working on the ecosystem, we can also work. I would say that healthy ecosystem, so the ecosystem that work well in terms of their component, is a real basis to build healthy people on healthy livestock, healthy wildlife.
Yes, I think
That's why, for example, the extinction is the one else is also to consider the health of the soil health now, the more and more people, the plant health, and to build really on this, or to have this broad view, and to work really on the ecosystem. So another way that's why I want also to shift, because I was a little not tired, but really sad all the time to investigate only bad things. So to show the bad thing of Emergence, and to switch. And now we have some projects, especially with UNESCO and the program of Malon Biosphere, but also the Biosphere Reserve. So that's why I want you, we keep in contact, because I work with on this, and starting that finally all these biosphere reserves, if they are working nicely in terms of managing nature and human together, they should have also be resilient in terms of disease, or maybe for the COVID-19. And working on this, so working on the system that seems to work. So, and say that, and to better understand what is work well in terms of human animal health, and not to put more data, more things to show that when it works badly, it have bad consequences. So we need to have a positive now, a positive vision, positive data, positive values, and very quickly. So I think everybody has understood, and that is critical. We have to move. Now we will speak a lot about the climate change. So everybody, the scientists are very clear. We have to act very fast. We cannot wait so much, but we need to show that the good experiences of territories and everywhere in the world, that the local administration, the local communities can build something that works, like we name as social ecology or co-viability. So it's the viability of the ecosystem, or the ecology, and the viability of the population. And one of the measurements for me, because I'm not from physician, I'm not from a vet, I use health as a way to quantify and to maintain the wealth and the well-being, including the well-being of the wildlife, including the well-being of the livestock. We need to have positive evidence now.
Yes, I would like to in fact mention that to the audience, that both of our speakers today are exemplary examples of how One Health is actually put into action. Dr. Grace is a veterinarian, but she's working at food safety systems. So looking at also livestock, because livestock are a source of livelihood as well as food where she's working. And then also how that leads to safe food for people in resource poor areas, especially in poverty-ridden areas. So she's traveling all three, the environment, the animal health, as well as human health. And Dr. Morand, straddles the wildlife and biodiversity aspect, human actions, anthropogenic changes, how that impacts human health and animal health, and leads back into biodiversity and eco-health. So they're both very good examples, and I would encourage you to read up more about their work to see how One Health is practiced and what the One Health approach really means. The final question we have is, do you think there are many diseases that we are yet to discover? How often are infections misdiagnosed due to lack of information?
Oh, there are a lot of diseases out there. I mean, they have started to look at, I think there was the initial famous study was done in the Sargasso Sea, and they just put a bucket into the water and they pulled up literally thousands of unknown viruses and bacteria. Another project called Predict, which has come to an end, well, it's actually been renewed with COVID, funded by the USAID. They did what was called, Nathan Wolfe and others, they did what was called virus hunting. And that is when you go out and you just look, sequence and look for everything. And you always find a lot which is unknown. And yes, lack of information. I mean, there is a problem with lack of diagnostics. I think what we need are more cheap diagnostics. And again, with coronavirus, there have been some advances in diagnostic technology. So hopefully we'll start seeing those coming on board. But I would certainly say to anyone, especially in a low and middle income country, don't let someone diagnose you without testing for anything. If they just say you've got malaria, our studies suggest that you may well not have malaria and you may actually have a zoonosis.
Agree first for the laboratories and the support for the laboratories. And there is this kind of a bigger initiative by the International Agency for Atomic Energy, Zodiac, this project Zodiac, which is completely devoted to the lab capacity. And it was launched in 2020, donc last year in the pandemic. So now there are reference every country. So they are really starting really this year, end of the year on the next year. So we have something. But in terms of viruses, yes. For example, I just give you what we have done. We collected 3,000 rodents along the Mekong River from Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, and 22 species, and all sequences, 500,000 virus. What we can do with this, 100 families, and we found of course all of this. When we know that we know really well, including all the virus of plant, really well, 5,000. So I think regarding to the importance of emerging disease, the importance of outbreaks, we have to be sure that we have to work to prevent this. We cannot, and what it is, for me, sometimes it's like the dream of the museology. It's not because you are fulfilling the museum with new species that you will fight against the loss of biodiversity. And it's the same with the virus hunting. I did this, so I know I could fit myself. It's not only with this. We have to work on the driver, really the driver. And it's very urgent because if we work on the driver, we will work also because it's the same driver that are related to the climate change, to the biodiversity loss with the, so we have really to focus now really on the drivers and not really on the biosurveillance, on the biosecurity, which I also completely agree with some of my colleagues from French colleagues that have put the biosecurity on the biosurveillance of the wildlife. And I finish with this number. In 1960, there was only less than 4 billion of chicken. In 2020, according to the FAO, there are 30 billion of chickens on Earth. At the same time, the number of wild birds starting, it was estimated in 1997 at 400 billion. It was estimated a couple of months ago at 40 billion. So the number of poultry is almost the same number as the total number of wild birds. The weight of the cattle on Earth is, the biomass is higher than the biomass of humans. So this is something very serious that we have to take into account. So we have really to work on the driver. It's not because we will have sequenced everything that we will have we can do everything. We have to work on the driver, and we have to really to work on the public health on the public animal health. And I say public is really important. If not, look at the France. We have transformed our public health system into it's not a public health. They are doing care of individual care, and it was a mess in terms of regarding a pandemic, because we have destroyed animal health, which are also more and more on trouble. So we really need to reinvest a lot in terms of public health and the public animal health. And I'm not from this sector, no? So I'm not a vet, I'm not a medical doctor.
Not at all. I think that's very right. So basically what both of you are saying is, if you go looking for trouble, you'll find a lot of it. So the best strategy is to avoid the trouble in the first place by taking a certain few precautions and by maintaining or containing our actions to just what we need and not what we desire, right? I think that's the thing that we would like to end on here. I thank you both for such an interesting and very invigorating discussion, and really great to share the views from two different one continent and one separate group of countries. Dr. Morand has worked all over Southeast Asia, and Dr. Grace all over Africa. So, and also in Asia. So I'm really thankful to both of you, and I hope our audience enjoyed it too. And we'll keep in touch. For our audience, I would like to remind that our video of this webinar would be available on our website on the YouTube channel. And also, I would like to leave you with this slide of ours. I'm sorry, I lost connection. And so this says, just to remind you again that if you would like to donate to CWS and our activities, kindly go to our website and look at the QR code, or you could reach us at outreach@cws.india.org. All right, thank you very much, everybody, and have a great evening.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Bindu.